So in today's video, I'm going to show you a super quick way to paint simple portraits like this in Procreate. After that, I'm going to go through and paint a bunch of them, and we're going to create a sort of portrait collection art print like this. As usual, I'll list the brushes I'm using for this in the description, but I think you'll be able to follow this with any brushes you're comfortable with. So as you can see, I've already grabbed a couple of screenshots from Pinterest, and these are pretty much random. For the main example here to show you all the steps, I think I'm going to use this one. And the process I'm using to paint these simple portraits has 10 steps. And the first thing we need to do is paint the head and the neck. And for that, I'm going to use the consistent quill brush. And I'll try to find a skin tone that somewhat matches the photo. And I'll just draw an oval like this for the head. And then I'll continue with the same stroke and do the neck, and then a kind of a rough blob for the shoulders. And the reason I did this in one continuous stroke is if I added more strokes, there'd be a sort of dark area where they overlapped, so this just avoids that. And it's optional, but if you want, you can add a simple shadow on the chin. So for that, I'll use the freehand selection tool, and I'll just make a sort of wedge-shaped selection like that. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll darken it, saturate it, and then shift it towards a kind of purple tone. And it's a subtle thing, but it brings out a little bit of depth. Next, I can move on and do the ears. And in this portrait, the ears are pretty much hidden, but I still like to paint them on anyways. And usually I'll just choose a slightly darker version of the skin tone, and maybe a little bit redder. And I'll just draw them on like this, kind of about the halfway point on the head. After that, I'll do the nose. And it's going to be pretty much the same color I did with the ears. Maybe in this case, I'll make it a little bit redder. For the brush, I'm going to use the fine liner pen, and I'll just draw a very simple nose like this. If you want, you can also use a slightly darker color to add some dots for the nostrils. After that, I'll paint the eyes, and it's pretty simple. I'm going to use the same fine liner pen, and I'll just do some kind of arcs like this. Then I'll choose a darker kind of brown tone, but not quite black, and I'll use this to kind of paint the irises. And in general with faces, it's a good idea to keep the eyes and the eyebrows kind of in line with the ears. So in this case, they turned out a little bit too high. But if you have any issues like this, don't worry about it for now because we'll fix it in a later step. Next, I'll move on and do the mouth. And I prefer to paint this kind of sideways. For the brush, I'm going to use the consistent quill. And I'll choose a red color that sort of matches the lips. I think that looks pretty good. And I'll use this brush at a really small size, and I'll do a sort of stroke-based thing here. So I'm going to start with a very light pressure, then I'll press harder to flare it out, and then I'll taper it off again. Then on the kind of corners of the mouth, I'll do a little dot, then I'll choose a slightly darker color, a tinier brush size, and I'll do a line just down the middle. Now if I look at the reference photo, the lower lip is pretty big, and there's a pretty strong kind of M shape with the upper lip. So to get that effect here, I like to use the liquify tool, and I'll set it to push, and I'll just use it at a couple different sizes. First to sort of pull up the upper lip a little bit, then I can pull it down in the middle to create that M shape. And then I'll use it again to sort of enlarge the lower lip. Next, I can move on and do the eyebrows. And for that, I'll choose a color kind of similar to the hair color. For the brush, I'll use the colored pencil, and I'll do these kind of stroke-based as well. And finally, with all the face details kind of finished, I can move on and do the hair. And I like to do the hair on a separate layer above the portrait so far. For the brush, I'm going to use the Shoto brush. And I like to do the hair kind of in as few strokes as possible. So I'm going to try to mentally break it up. So this could be one stroke, maybe this is another, and I'll just kind of transfer it over onto the portrait. And once the overall shape of the hair is kind of blocked out like this, I like to go over it again to add some more detail. So for that, I'll use the colored pencil brush. And this time, I'm going to use a lighter hair color. And I'll kind of do this just in the direction of the hair to add some texture. And the reason I do the hair on a separate layer is I like to tune the colors after I paint it. So for that, I'll make sure the hair layer is selected, and then I'll just use the hue, saturation, and brightness to kind of mess with it a little bit and make it match the portrait photo a bit better. And once the portrait is kind of finished at this point, I like to refine the features. So for that, I have to merge everything together onto one layer. Then I'll go to my adjustments, and I'll use Liquify just to kind of push and balance some of the different facial features. Mostly, I'm focusing on making the eyes the right level. This is also the time where you might kind of warp the ears so they're a little bit higher. Usually, I like the ears to be at the same level as the eyebrows. And another thing I pay close attention to is sort of the shape of the chin and the cheekbones. For this portrait, she has a pretty small chin and pretty pronounced cheekbones, so I'll try to replicate that as well. And there we go. I think this looks a lot better. Next, we can move on and start adding some accessories. And those will be on a separate layer. And I think I'll start with the glasses. And for glasses, I think it's important if they're really symmetrical. And usually what I'll do is I'll just draw one side of it. Then I'll use the Liquify tool to kind of shape it a little bit. Then I'll duplicate the layer, move it to the other side, and then flip it. Then I'll merge both of those layers together and just finish the glasses like this. And for the clothes, you could use any brush, but I like the scratchiness of the Shoto brush, so I'll use that. And then this shirt has some kind of white stripes, so I'll do those using the colored pencil brush. If the portrait had earrings or a hat, this is also the time to add those in. And once the accessories are finished, we can finalize the whole illustration. So for that, I'll merge it all together onto one layer, and I'll do one last kind of warp, but this time I'm going to use the warp and the distort tool. And the reason I do this is just to give the final illustration a little bit more personality. And there we go, that's pretty much the whole process. Now at this point, I'm just going to kind of fast forward through this and paint 2 more people. After that, I'll show you all 9 different portraits I ended up painting, and then how to arrange them into the final illustration. And there we go, here's all the finished portraits. I think altogether it took me about 35 minutes to paint all these, and I just used the arrow tool to arrange them into a grid. For now, they're all kind of separated onto individual layers, and all that's pretty self-explanatory, but there's one trick I want to mention. So in some cases, I want to make the lines of portraits look more different, and I can do that sometimes by mirroring them. So in this case, I think I'll flip her around. And this makes it so they're facing different directions and just makes it seem kind of more diverse. So I'm going to do that to a few other portraits. And just like that, this art print is finished. Now, I really like arranging things kind of in collections like this. And the reason is because some of these illustrations just individually are really too simple to stand by themselves. They definitely could though, but kind of as a group, they all sort of support each other and it looks much more interesting and sophisticated. As always, if you think I've earned it, please give this video a like. And here are 2 more watercolor tutorials I think you'll love to watch next.